Hey everybody, welcome to EduMatch. Thank you so much for joining us. So today is April 28th, and I'm super excited because we have a fantastic conversation for you, moderated by the one, the only Dr. Sheldon Eakins. So super excited to have him in the house. It's funny because this conversation, the idea for this tweet and talk kind of came about when we were doing a special episode because Sheldon had I asked him what he wanted to talk about on the Tweet and Talk, and he said, "Can we talk about microaggressions?" And I was just like, "Absolutely, let's talk about microaggressions." So, pretty much when we were having that conversation, then somebody said, "Hey, this is a good conversation. Can you bring it back?" So here we are for a Tweet and Talk. So I'm super excited to have this conversation tonight. So just like any other time, we're going to kick things off with panelist introductions. So, Nicole, if you're ready, if you could please introduce yourself to our lovely watchers and listeners.
Hey everybody, my name is Nicole Taylor, and I am an instructional technology coordinator in the Dallas, Texas area. I get to work with teachers and students and administrators looking at best practices for instructional technology. Here in the last year or two, I've really been exploring how we can dig a little deeper when it comes to digital citizenship to really help kids uncover a lot of things that they need to simply be better, to, digging a little deeper with DigCit and looking at isms and biases in order to just help kids be better. So I'm super excited about this conversation tonight.
Oh, that is awesome. And super excited to have you. And I love that. Like, looking into the isms and how that affects digital citizenship. So definitely a great topic. And I'm so glad that you're exploring that. All right. So we have a few other people signed up for panel. They may be joining us in progress. But for right now, then Nicole and I will be panelists to Dr. Eakins' moderation. So Sheldon, if you could please introduce yourself, and then we'll go ahead and get the conversation going.
Well, I am Dr. Sheldon L. Eakins, host of the Leading Equity podcast. I am also a special education director at a tribal at the Fort Hall Tribal Reservation, Indian Reservation here in Idaho. So I'm in the middle of Idaho, almost southeast area. The weather here it's weird because yesterday it was sunny day. I took the kids out to the park, and then today it was snowing. So I don't understand the weather yet, but at the same time, I enjoyed those opportunities to go outside. So yeah, I'm a SPED director, and I also host a Leading Equity podcast.
That is awesome. And I love your podcast, so everybody should check that out. That is such a great podcast. So, all right. So without any further ado, then let's go ahead and get the conversation going. So I'm going to turn it right back over to you, Sheldon.
All right. So we're talking about microaggressions today, and I'm going to pitch this to Nicole first, and then we'll bring in Sarah to get her perspective as well. But I'm going to start off with the definition of microaggressions, and then we'll ask our first question. So microaggressions may be based on socioeconomic status, disability, gender expression or identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, nationality, or religion. What are some examples of how these insults or insensitivities may be exhibited by students or adults within the school community?
That is a big question, Sheldon, but I'm ready. I'm ready for it. I would say I could just say, like, in my space, dealing with like instructional technology, just supporting and going in and out. Oftentimes different things that, like, what do you do? Or why are you here? Things that try to disqualify you, make you have to, read your resume off in order to show that you deserve to be in certain spaces. I've also seen that even towards students, like, are you supposed to be in this space? Or what have you done before? And I think those curveballs are thrown at certain groups of people who don't look like they should be in that space, or who look I wouldn't say don't look like they should be in that space. They look differently than the other people who've normally taken up space in different capacities, or different committees, or different events, or different competitions. So that's just what I've seen as a teacher and as a student.
Yeah, is that, that's a great example as far as, why are you here? And then it's a lot of that is stems from like stereotypes and like, are you supposed to be here? Those kind of situations. Yeah, I mean, that's a good example. What about you, Sarah? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely want to piggyback off of what Nicole said. That is so true. And personally, I feel like I've experienced it more as a student than as an educator, just because the district where I work is well, it's very diverse, and I use that in all senses of the word. So our educator staff, our students, so I've had the fortune not to encounter that as much in my 9 to 5. Now, when we talk about going beyond that, then that's a whole different story, because there's a whole world outside of that. And but definitely, I want to echo what Nicole was saying. As a student, there have been times where I've been made to feel like I'm not supposed to be in this, this class, receiving these gifted services, things like that, and just really making it feel unwelcome for me. And I'll even go out on a limb right now and take it fast forward to 2018, 2019, where we are right now, and just say that in society, I'm personally, I'm seeing it died down for a while, but now I'm starting to see it come back up like a lot. So that's my take.
And I would throw it out there in another light as well, because if we're talking about why are you supposed to be, or why are you here, and then there's the other take on it is like, aren't you supposed to be here, right? Where it's like, well, I just assume that you should be in this space. Like if I see a tall black person, a black student, oh, I just assume that they're a basketball player. They're an athlete. They should be at basketball practice, right? And you see someone walking down the hallway and you're like, well, aren't you supposed to be at basketball practice? And you're like, well, I don't even play basketball, right? But that subtle microaggression where you assume that, okay, I see a tall black kid, they must be playing basketball, or they must be an athlete in some fashion. Why aren't they there? So I think that's the other thing that we can consider as well when it comes to the microaggressions, is like, there's that, why are you here? And then there's that, aren't you supposed to be here take on things. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. And I just wanted to jump back in really quickly to clarify a point that I made when I said that I personally saw a dip and seeing it rise back up. Not to say that it has ever gone anywhere, but I feel like people were making more of an effort to be PC, so to speak. So they weren't as in your face with all of with this egregious behavior. But now that, it's just like, now I'm definitely seeing that folks are taking off the mask and just acting all kinds of a fool. So that's just one thing I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, you know what? I grew up in the South, and microaggressions are a lot different in the South. I mean, it's pretty much like, where you should go and where you shouldn't go. The experience that I've had growing up in Texas was pretty overt. And then when I moved to the Northwest, I really started to learn more about microaggressions, because my experiences were always subtle things. It's like little things that people would say or do, or actions and things like that weren't always, you had to kind of read between the lines. It wasn't just out there. And then you start to really recognize those things. Nicole, you're in Texas. So like, what is your take on, like, what are some of the experiences that you've had as far as maybe other educators or other people in your community that maybe you've experienced some microaggressions?
I was actually thinking about that as you were speaking, that, yeah, I am from Texas. My dad's an educator. And so a lot of times I've been invited in spaces where I looked around and I was the only person, because Mr. Sanders taught their kids, or Mr. Sanders. So I think that gave me a certain level of privilege that I didn't realize until I was older. I would say probably when I was 30, feels like that was a long time ago. I started to kind of unpack a lot of the incidents and conversations and events that happened in those spaces, when I was like the only one, and things like, how do you get your hair, like, just and I don't think it's the what. Oftentimes it's the how. It's how it's said, not like in a, wow, that's really cool, let's talk about it, but like, oh girl, like, how do you do that? Like, why do you do that? Like, why? And so it took me a while. I always feel like sometimes in the heat of the moment of the microaggression, it can like take you aback, and you don't know what to do, and you don't know what to say, especially as a child. As an adult, I feel a lot more equipped to simply, I learned from Val Brown to simply pause and say, what do you mean by that? And a lot of times that pushes the aggressor to say, whoa, hold up. They hear what I'm saying. Like, they heard that. They picked up on that. And I know as a parent, I'm arming my kids so that when someone talks to you, out of the way, you pause and you make them accountable for those words that they said that was disrespectful. Even if they say it with a smile, you can be disrespected with a smile. But just being, like the only person of color at a dance, or the only person of color at an academic competition, and hearing things like, well, how are you here? Why are you here? Your friends aren't here. Why isn't so-and-so here? As a child, you may not really get it. But now, I've spent time looking back, and it's like, oh, that's what that meant. And as an adult, you understand, because it really makes you sometimes second guess like who you are, and not be as confident. So I didn't know you were from Texas. Hey.
That's right. H-Town.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, I was like, yep, I know that. And I think it is different in Texas. Like, it is like in the South, it is different, and it's just kind of a way of life, and you just kind of know that things are the way they should go. Hindsight is always 2020. And now I see, okay, I was afforded a lot of opportunities that a lot of my classmates who were people of color were not. Simply because my dad was an educator, and he opened a lot of doors for me by interacting with in different areas. But I definitely get what you're saying about being from the South.
Yeah, I would also add, just with your hair example, I've seen a child in school who had, a Black child who had natural hair, and one of the teachers saying, oh, see, that kid always has crazy hair. And I had to correct her. I said, oh, hold on now, that this is the way this child's hair grows naturally. So your hair grows a certain way naturally. This is how their hair grows naturally. It's not crazy hair. It's just different texture. And you could see that they were like, oh, okay. Well, I didn't mean it. How I didn't mean it that way, but that's how it came across. And so, yeah, just those little subtle things. Again, it's always, we could talk about implicit bias. We can talk about those things that are there that we don't necessarily recognize. And a lot of it comes from the way we perceive certain groups to be. But yeah, it's crazy how sometimes these things happen. And even the most well-to-do, most meaningful people that don't, they feel like, they do their best to try to be more, I guess, inclusive. They still make these subtle mistakes. Let me move to another question here. So how might a microaggression from a teacher or maybe even a principal impact a student? Sarah, why don't you take that one?
All right, cool. I'm going to cheat and go to my PLN on this one. So on Twitter, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, and apologies if I'm not, but Gamzee was saying that, first of all, students are really affected badly in such a situation, may make them feel a certain way. So definitely agree with that. Just like Nicole was saying, when you are, a child, or, you don't have as much life experience, and I'm just way generalizing here because, sometimes our students have more life experience than I do. So, I mean, it really boils down to whatever we're looking at. But someone who may not have as much experience going through these things, and it might start to affect the way that they view themselves. And I mean, I feel like that's a tragedy, to affect a child's self-perception in such that way, so my hope is that, obviously my hope is that the microaggressions go away, but realistically, my hope is that when situations like this occur to our students and they have someone that they can confide in and a safe space where they can go and they can feel loved and supported and nurtured and, to help them navigate this because it can really, really do damage to students.
May I jump in here, Sheldon? Because I heard Sarah say, like, your hope is that they go away. And that would be phenomenal. But I think one thing, too, that I've really, girl, wouldn't it? I think that the more, because I feel like we're, like, hyper connected these days. And so I think the more opportunities that people have to connect and talk to different people and meet different people, and kind of like you said, like, you've seen a spike and these and not even all the time microaggressions, just racially fueled aggressive behavior, and even more so you'll see it in teens. School districts are really having to tackle this. I really feel as if like there has to be a shift in what we do to ensure that we empower kids to call that out. And empower kids to, call it out when they see it in teachers, when they see it in administrators, and especially when they see it in their peers. Because, kids, they're a product of their environment. And I just think about like my dad desegregated a school. He helped to integrate a school in our hometown. So his issues around, diversity and inclusion are like so much different than mine. And these kids are coming up in homes and raised by parents that, lived through the Jim Crow era, and they did those kind of things. So it's really up to us, and when kids come to us, that we teach them more than just be kind, be nice, say nice things, but how to even look at what you're saying and the things that are being said to you, and pick apart those microaggressions and call people out when they're saying things that are wrong. I think that would be the most powerful thing that we can do for kids, is just to empower them to be able to know what to do when they see those things.
So Nicole, you answered my next question with that, because that was exactly where I was going with that. Is how do we empower our or support a student that has been a victim of a microaggression? And I think you hit it right there with the whole, helping students to learn to speak up and to empower themselves. Because if no one says anything, and even bystanders don't say anything, then that situation happens. Maybe that student has to go through the rest of their day, maybe the rest of their week, or the rest of the semester with this teacher, and having these feelings about the way that they were treated, or something that was said, or something that happened to them. We have to be able to teach students, okay, here's this happened to you. This is a microaggression. I mean, explain the words. I mean, I think you were mentioning, Nicole, earlier that you were kind of doing a lot more training with all the isms, right? And just trying to let students know what these words mean. They're not just buzzwords, but these are things that impact kids in addition to impacting students as well.
And I want to say too, like, I don't have the answers. I wish I could say, oh, I know everything. I don't. But one of my greatest tools, one of my greatest resources has been teaching tolerance. Like, if there is anything that I need to address, or a lot of time, things that I want to present in a workshop around this work, I've been able to, go through their website and look through their resources in order to find the kid-friendly language in order to, help kids to work through that. So that's a great resource. So shout out to Teaching Tolerance.
All right. And Sarah, what are your thoughts? I mean, what are some other ways that maybe we can empower our students to, whenever they get a microaggression that happens to them, what are some ways that we can maybe teach them to how to react to those?
Yeah, definitely. Nicole, once again, had a great point about teaching students to unpack this and to say something. I know that's my struggle, as you were mentioning earlier, saying something in that moment to let people know that it's wrong, or asking them what exactly you meant. I think that's genius. Like, I'll tell you all a quick story of something that happened to me a few months ago when I went to the airport. And, I was waiting on my bag to come out of the carousel, and it was one of the first bags that came out. So, I picked it up. I saw it had my name, and I started, and I noticed the whole time there was this woman like just glaring at me like, ugh. So I get my bag and I'm walking out of the airport, and then all of a sudden this man comes like jogging to me, and I'm just like, can I help you? And he's just like, are you sure that's your bag? I'm just like, at that time, I clammed up, all I could do was show him my name on the tag because I just clammed up, just that anger, that, sadness, that hurt, So I think it's powerful to teach our students strategies that they have in their toolkit. Cause I've been, like all of us, we've been dealing with this for a lifetime, so 37 years in and I'm still, I still clam up. So the tools that we can teach students to put in their toolkit will definitely go a long way.
I think I don't remember who it was. It was either you or Nicole had mentioned that it catches them off guard, right? Like when you get a microaggression, when it happens to you, you're not expecting it, right? It's just out of the blue. Sometimes it's just like, where did you get? Like, how did that even come up? Like, where does that come from? And like, how do we react to that? It's just sometimes it just throws us off so much that it's like, okay, how do I respond to this? I'm upset. Or I could walk away, I could turn the other cheek kind of thing, or I could use this as a teachable moment. And I think if we help train our students and maybe even go over scenarios in the classroom, like take some class time, depending on what class it is, and say, you know what, here's a couple of things I want you to think about. And this is all part of, kind of bringing in that social justice pedagogy and we're bringing in some scenarios, some word problems, some math problems. And like, here's a situation. This is what happened. Go. How do you respond? And then you're giving the students an opportunity to take some ownership in this situation. And now they'll say, okay, this is what I would say in this situation, or this is how I would react, or if I'm a bystander, what would you do if you saw this happening? What would you do? And I think if we were to just do those little things and just practice it, especially for those students who are marginalized populations, I think that would be beneficial to them. And not only does it help them learn how to respond to these situations, because often, even as adults, we don't always understand how to respond to them. But as students, if they're not sure on how to respond to it, we could teach them that, and then the students know that the teacher cares about them because they want them to be successful as they go throughout their day. Let me. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you someone wanted to jump in?
Oh, just really quickly. First, I agree with everything that you just said. And second, just wanted to just kind of state. So this is not going to be anything new or revolutionary that I say right now, but just something that I've heard that has really resonated with me. And people have been saying in my circles for a long time, but it's not enough to be not racist. You got to be anti-racist. So we have to teach all students all of the isms. Use whatever privilege you have in relation to whatever ism is going on. So it's not enough to just not commit that ism, but instead use your privilege to be anti that ism. So that was the only thing I wanted to jump back in with.
Oh yeah. It's not enough to not say nothing, right? If you're not saying anything at all, you're part of that problem. You gotta be willing to speak up. And I'm glad you brought up the anti-racism, because that is something that we should strive for. So next question. Now we're having this conversation and we know what a microaggression is, but we're fallible people, and sometimes we make the mistakes ourselves and create a microaggression against a student. What should we do if we realize that we've used a microaggression to a student or a colleague? Nicole?
Oh my gosh, I can say that this was probably 4 years ago, and I misinterpreted a student. I didn't do it purposefully, but again, sometimes these things are done purposefully and sometimes not, right? I mistakenly called a young lady a young man. And she was very hurt. She was very angered. I can tell you that I probably said, I'm sorry, before she could even get out of the room. I think the first thing is to apologize. But that's in any time that there's a mistake made towards a student. I think we have to model what it means to not just say I'm sorry, but to fix the wrong. ask them, to let them know you're sorry, let them know that you were ignorant in that situation, and let them know that you will do the work to not do that again. I will say I've never done that again before in my life. And now giving kids the time, the space to let me know how they identify, because that's not my job to pick out that identity for them. But I think our first job as adults is always to be the first person to say I'm sorry, and to fix that, and then model what it means to kind of like what Sarah was saying. Like, it's not enough to just say, hey, I'm against it. Like, to be anti whatever that is, to show kids like what that really looks like when you are making that change. And hopefully I did model that for her in that situation.
Yeah. What about you, Sarah?
Totally. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Just because I feel like you said it perfectly. Apologizing. And I mean, if the microaggression was done publicly, then a public apology is warranted, If it was done privately, then apologizing in private, but definitely making sure to apologize and to clarify, to ask any clarifying questions if need be, so that it doesn't happen again. So absolutely, I second all of that.
Yeah, you had to be willing to take ownership, and it's hard a lot of times as adults, and to admit that we're wrong. And I think that's the first step, is just taking that ownership and say, hey, look, I didn't realize what I was saying or what I was doing, and learn from that, learn from it. I mean, I don't think that we should go throughout our day and just feel really, really bad and just kind of like, oh man, I messed up. I think if we take the ownership and say, yeah, I made a mistake, and I'm really sorry about what I said to you or what I did to you. That was a total stereotype that I perpetuated, and my bad. And then we can kind of, shake hands or whatever, however you want to, reconcile things, and then you move on. But that's a moment, that's a lesson that you've learned, and that you're not going to repeat again. Now, the problem is if we keep doing that again, like if it happens again, similar, maybe not exactly the same way, but if we continue to do the same type of microaggressions, then we have to look at ourselves and say, maybe I got something that I need to work out, because right now it's not changing. I haven't learned from my mistakes. So, I mean, again, we all do it, and we've all done it. And I think the main thing is, like Nicole and Sarah, you guys were saying, is like, be willing to apologize, take that ownership and responsibility. So I do have one final question here. What are some examples of microaggressions from a policy and pedagogical standpoint? Who would like to start off with that one?
I think the one that I see in the news that I'm seeing more and more is the policing of our kids' hair. That is a huge microaggression, and I am seeing more and more where they can't, kids can't wear braids. Kids can't wear, well, that's like a total cultural ban. I don't know if it's even micro, because I mean, these things are like, they're not just happening in small bursts anymore, right? So I don't even know if you'd call it micro. I would say that is one thing that I'm seeing as far as a lot of policies. And I think there has been a push, because I think about like in school, and I think about like literature, how things that people are studying. And I know there's been a push to just be a little bit more open, to allow kids to see themselves in the things that they learn. And in history, just thinking about Texas history period, or U.S. history period, I mean, there's not a lot of coverage of all the various races in these spaces. It's usually taken up by one group who is the villain. But, that's a whole nother chat for another day. But just when you think about, just history or literature, those spaces as well, just not including groups that have been really important in those spaces, I think that's a microaggression in itself as well.
I would add, just because I work in SPED, I would just add that, when we look at referrals, so when it because special education and gifted and talented, those auxiliary kind of programs, the teachers kind of are gatekeepers in a way. And so, like, who are they referring? You see, there's so much data that shows that there's a high, overrepresentation of students that are in students of color that are in special education, yet there's not a lot of students that are in those gifted and talented programs. And I think a lot of that has to do with what teachers perceive a student is capable or their abilities versus their disability. And I think that's a huge microaggression when you're trying to, when you look at how these systems are put in place to where who's getting access to these, to gifted and talented versus who's placed into special education. Sarah, you look like you had something that you wanted to share.
Oh yeah, no, I was agreeing with both of you, and I feel like I'm doing that a lot this episode because y'all are both on point and just saying so much that really resonates with me. But I would definitely agree with everything that y'all have said, and a lot of these are systemic issues of racism and discrimination. When I was thinking about it, then yeah, the first thing that came to mind for me also was the policing of hairstyles and of dress. I remember hearing this week about some place that put in place a parent dress code or something to that effect, and to me that made absolutely no sense. But in addition, and I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the absurdity of it, not because it's funny in any way, but I mean, that's just another way to further marginalize people. I would say another thing that oftentimes is lacking is that people are excluded because not enough forethought is given to the situation. Like if I were to think of English learners, right? Their parents and the communication that goes home to them. If a family does not speak English, what is being done to communicate with them? Are they just being excluded from everything? That is, and hopefully that's not the case, but I feel like it is. Even in districts, sometimes that have, translation services or what have you, then they might have them for groups that are represented in large part. But what about the one kid who speaks a different language than everyone else in the class? Are they not going to receive that translation service for their parents? And is that child's family going to be excluded? So that's another thing that comes to mind for me. So there are so many examples of this. But that's just one that really really came to mind for me.
Yeah. And there's a lot of data that supports, administrators, school districts and things are automatically placing them in ESL programs, ELL programs, just based off their name. Like, oh, you have a Hispanic sounding last name, so I think you may or may not speak English, or you transferring in from Mexico. So, oh yeah, we're going to go ahead and place you into this program without even taking the time to learn whether or not the student does need these services. But we're just so used to most of those migrant workers coming in. And so, oh yeah, we're just going to place them into the ESL program without even taking the time to test them or even see where they're at or giving them that chance to show, that they are capable of doing the work that, in a general classroom population. So that's all
totally. I hear you.
I was just going to say that's my last question. So I don't know how we wrap things up here. This is your show, so I guess I'll give it back over to you.
All right, this sounds good. Well, I definitely want to thank you both for an amazing conversation. So thank you so much. This was very rich. And I wanted to also give a shout out to people who were interacting with us on Twitter. So once again, Gamzee, I hope I pronounced that correctly, as well as on the YouTube live. So also Phi, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Luis. So thank you all for joining us. In addition, this is going to be podcasted in a couple of weeks. Uh-oh, did I freeze? I hope I didn't freeze, but good news is I have my other laptop right here. I think I'm still going. So, so it'll be available as a podcast in the next few weeks, as well as on Facebook Live. So join us back at 7:00. We are going to have Rochelle Dene Poth, a special episode with her at 7 Eastern. So we hope to see you back here at the same bad time, same bad channel. So that's podcast with an s.edumatch.org/tweet talk. So thank you again to everyone and have a great, great evening.